Welcome to Tech for Good with Bethnal Green Ventures. My name's Paul Miller, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Chris Edson, co-founder and CEO of Second Nature. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. So let's start. Tell us a bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? What did you do before Second Nature? And when you were younger, did you think you would start a business?
That's a great question. So I grew up in suburban Oxfordshire. I wanted to do pretty much every single job under the sun other than work for someone. But I didn't really work that out until I think I left university. So I think growing up, the career choices I went through, I started off, my first real thing that I wanted to do, I wanted to be a musician. So when I was 15 or 16, I don't know if this in the corner of my camera, there's some guitars. When I was 15 or 16, and my dad bought me my first 60-pound Yamaha guitar. And in the words of Bryan Adams, I played it until my fingers bled. I was like obsessed with Metallica at the time, and I thought being a rock star was probably the path for me. It just made a lot of sense. So I just obsessively played guitar. Academically, I also did quite well in exams. So I was kind of wrestling with this idea that, okay, I'm getting good grades, I'm probably going to go to a good university, but like, I don't really want to do any of that. I just want to be a musician, which actually took me, I still kind of held that even going to university. I was still fairly convinced I wanted to be a musician. The other thing I wanted to be was, I wanted to write for film and TV. So I went through a path where I was writing TV and film scripts. I was going to go I had a place over in the US to do fine writing masters. I was going to be a photographer at one point.
There's lots of creative endeavors in there.
Yeah. I guess I always just had a million and one hobbies growing up. So I wanted to be an athlete at one point because I was rowing quite seriously. I took my rowing very, very seriously. So I was going to go be an athlete. When I was kind of 18, I rowed for Great Britain as a junior international. So that was going to be part of my life. I guess one thing was clear is that I didn't really want to do a traditional journey. But the other thing that I often reflect on is that no part of me thought about building a business or wanting to be an entrepreneur. And so I think throughout my journey of building a company, I've always felt a slight degree of imposter syndrome that I didn't have. I was never that, you speak to that friend that had the lemonade stand or funded their way through university through selling t-shirts or something. Like, we've always got that like hustler friend. That was never me. That didn't really interest me. So yeah, I've always had that question mark about, am I a true entrepreneur? Because I didn't really have that growing up.
Yeah.
It definitely came later.
Tell us a bit about what inspired you and Mike, your co-founder, to start Second Nature.
Yeah, there were two big things that inspired us. So in 2014 or thereabouts, Mike and I were working with NHS England. So we were actually strategy consultants. We were evil strategy consultants. The reason why I became a strategy consultant, by the way, because I've just said how I didn't want to do traditional work, is because my mum told me I would really regret it if I didn't have at least a year or two of a normal job. So she said, you can go and do whatever you want, get a job for a bit so you've got something to kind of fall back on if all of these stupid dreams fall apart. So became a strategy consultant, and I was like 25, working with NHS England on their diabetes and obesity strategy. And I was just blown away that this problem was so enormous. It was looking like it was going to cripple the whole NHS system, was just how much the NHS spends on diabetes and obesity. But the second thing that was clear was the NHS didn't really seem to have an obvious path forward to help deal with this epidemic. So I thought, okay, there's something here. This is this ticking time bomb that is going to bankrupt the NHS if we don't do something about it. The second thing that was happening for me at the time is my dad was actually really struggling with his weight, and his GP said, you're kind of at risk for developing diabetes if you don't change. My dad, he was a very large man, as in he was 6'4". I'm also very tall. He was 6'4", 120 kilos, and he'd always struggled with his weight. And I tried to build a program for him to help him lose weight, and I struggled to do it. And I started to get quite interested in like, well, what's making him tick? What's making it really difficult for him to lose weight? And so those two things came together a bit, and I thought, right, we can use technology to solve this problem. So Mike and I, we quit our day jobs to form Second Nature and try and eradicate diabetes and obesity. We had no idea what we were going to build, but we knew we wanted to solve that problem.
So tell us a bit about a few of the challenges that you found, particularly, I guess, of working in healthcare as a startup with this passion for solving the problem, but maybe not necessarily knowing exactly what you wanted to do. What were the challenges that you faced in the early days?
So you'll remember, Paul, being our very first investor back in 2015. When you invested in us in the office space that we were in together, Mike and I had a printout of a printout of Ross from Friends shouting pivot while holding a sofa. And I think that's because we were pivoting pretty much every week. And I think in the early days, the real challenge was letting go of your preconceived notions about what it was that you were building. I think that was quite challenging because you have this tension between wanting to convince investors, your friends, your family that what you're doing is a good idea and that you have high conviction in it. Like, this is what it's going to be. This is the solution. This is the thing. And you have to say that with a degree of confidence, when also staying extraordinarily humble to the premise that you might be totally wrong. And you have to be open to that, because the alternative would be that you go and speak to customers and you test things and you don't listen to it because you're convinced that your next great idea is amazing. So I think the reason why we had that up on the board was kind of to embrace this idea that pivoting is fine. We'll probably get it wrong. We had a lot of feedback in the early days with people looking at Mike and I, and we were young, healthy, fit 20-somethings, asking us, how do you guys possibly know what it's like to live with obesity or diabetes? When in fact we'd say, well, the nice thing at least is that we don't have preconceived notions about what the solution is. We can be fairly dispassionate in a way about what it is what we're trying to build. We can respond to the data. We can do it in a hugely empathetic way, but we're not coming in saying this is how it should be solved. We're saying we're going to be pragmatists.
So tell us about what Second Nature is like now. So what's the product, what's the service offering, and how do you serve your customers now? Nearly 10 years later.
So I'd explain Second Nature as almost a headspace for weight loss. So we give people the psychological tools to help them. Let me start that again. The way I'd explain Second Nature is we're like a headspace for weight loss. So rather than helping people count calories and restrict food, we help people understand why they might be overeating to begin with. So it's a much more psychology-driven approach that has a lot of content about nutrition and exercise and sleep and stress management, rather than having people go on some kind of short-term diet. So again, it's all about getting to the root causes of why someone may be overweight, living with obesity, living with type 2 diabetes, why they might be in that position to begin with. In the early days, or at least the first kind of 8 years of building the business, our product was an app. So it was a program that you would take, you download an app, and then you go through a kind of 12-month journey on this app with a coach. You go through daily content, you'd be tracking your health, you'd be having your coach cheer you on, you'd be having a support group of other people who you're all going through the journey together. But in the last few years, the kind of obesity landscape has changed dramatically, primarily due to the advent of new GLP-1 weight loss medications. So 2 years ago, medications like Ozempic and Wegovy started to get approval for weight loss. Now more recently, Mounjaro. And at first, I think, well, firstly, I was very skeptical, because I thought, look, a drug isn't the problem here. This problem can be solved with behavioral science, with behavioral change. The other aspect of it was, we thought, is this also just a huge threat to our company and to our business? In the advent of an obesity medication, what is the role for behavioral change and psychological support? So on the first point, Mike and I really challenged any preconceived notions we had about what the right solution was. You look at the clinical data, and the medications are not only extraordinarily effective, but they're also very, very safe drugs. So we realized, okay, clearly there is a part that these medications should play in solving the obesity epidemic. And we also realized that people need, well, not everyone, but lots of people need additional support when they're taking their medications, because they don't want to stop the medication and then put all the weight back on again. So they want habit change support. They want support so that 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the line, they're able to keep off the weight that they've lost because they have this kind of bedrock of healthy habits that we've helped them build. And so that's more recently, that is the product offering that we offer, is we have our behavioural change program, and then we pair that with the medication that we roll out to the NHS, to health insurers, and then also we have a direct to consumer offering as well. So we do kind of all three verticals in this.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's been such an evolution over the years in terms of both things that you've learned and things you've tried out yourselves, but then also external shocks in terms of, regulation changes or new drugs coming along and all those kinds of things. I mean, it's never a dull moment kind of healthcare startups, is it?
No, it really isn't. And I think it goes back to that original point I made, which is you have to stay open to the new data. Even internally in the business, right? A lot of our internal culture would almost be anti-drug, anti-medication. And a lot of that is because people living with diabetes, a really big reason why they would want to kind of reverse their diabetes is they didn't want to take medication anymore. They thought, I want to come off the medication. And we would help them do that. So naturally, our kind of culture evolved to almost be anti-medication. There is another way to solve your diabetes, which is you can lose lots of weight and then you won't have to take medication anymore. So again, in the company, there's been this kind of, everyone in our business has had to like reevaluate what our belief system is a bit. A drug's good, a drug's bad. Where do we sit on that? And I think we've gotten to a nice place with it. But again, it's about staying humble and responsive to new data.
That's great. What's the long-term goal for Second Nature now? What do you think about in terms of the future of the company?
So the big goal for us is to improve the lives of 10 million people. So we're currently at about 300,000 people that we've helped, and that's all in the UK. We have some aspects of the business in the US, but that's mainly in the UK. So that the next 10 years, we want to have helped 10 million people improve their lifestyle. Right now, in the UK, there is many, many millions of people that need. So we're still really focused on the UK market. It's a market that we know really well. It's a market that we do very well in. It's a market that people know us in. But obviously in the future, the US and mainland Europe are definitely on the horizon. I've just learned to be cautious with international expansion because it's always more expensive and more difficult than you think it will be.
Yeah, watch this space. Yeah. Tell us a bit about what you enjoy about your job. So what do you enjoy about running a startup, running a business?
The most enjoyable part for me is working with absolutely brilliant people. So we're fortunate that the culture that we've built at Second Nature, I mean, I'm biased, but it's really brilliant. We have so many awesome people. I think we looked and our average tenure in the business is something like 4.3 years at this point, which is for a startup quite long. We have someone in the business that's been there for 7 years now, not including Mike and I. And what that means is we're just a very tight-knit culture. There's very high psychological safety, or at least I think there is. Maybe I wouldn't be told if there wasn't. But there's just very, very strong trust. Everyone's super smart. Everyone works very hard. And I think it's just wonderful to work with those people while solving an incredibly difficult problem. And I think I've come to realize that in life, it's a lot of what happiness and satisfaction is. It's working with brilliant people on a really important problem. And so I often have to remind myself, like, it doesn't really get better than this. You should enjoy this. This is good, especially when the business is going well and we're growing and all the rest of it, which isn't always the case. And we've had terrible, terrible years in the past. But yeah, I remind myself, and I'm grateful of that pretty much every day.
And then the flip side. So what don't you enjoy? What is it that, like, what are those moments where it's the toughest job on the planet?
I think the toughest job for a founder is to manage your own mental state and to learn to manage your emotions. I think that the role is extraordinarily stressful. You're dealing with huge amounts of uncertainty. And there's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. As the founders of the business, the buck stops with you. It means that if things go badly or you make a wrong decision, then a number of people could lose their jobs. And you have also maybe wasted, or not wasted, because, enjoyment is in the journey. But this thing that you've been building, it could be under threat, and you could lose all those years you've put into building this amazing thing. So there's a lot of responsibility. So with that uncertainty, I think you have to, or at least I've learned lots of different strategies for managing my mental state and my mental health. Because ultimately, if my resilience is good, lots of other good things in the business happen. The funny thing is, the energy of the business does often reflect that of the founders. So I was once, we had a non-exec director on our board, a guy called Gwyn Jones, who's a very, very lovely, but also very smart individual. He once gave me 3 leadership lessons. He said, okay, as CEO, Chris, you have just three lessons. Always smile, never run, and when the party's about to kick off, leave. And it's incredibly simple, but if you were to unpick it a bit, especially the first 2, always smile and never run. Even if you're delivering the worst bit of feedback and you're telling someone they're, maybe not if you're telling someone they're underperforming, but even if you're delivering some pretty tough news, you can do it with a smile. And then the whole business will reflect the fact that you have a positive energy about you. Never run. Again, it's because if people can see you panicking, then everyone starts to panic. It's like a virus that spreads through the organization. And then obviously when the party's about to kick off, leave. Yeah, I used to be quite good at that. Now I have a habit of staying.
Embarrassing yourself.
Exactly. It's all because of great psychological safety, Paul. That's why.
So let's finish off with, I think it's linked, but what advice would you give to someone looking to start their own Tech for Good venture now? So thinking back, what are the great pieces of advice you've been given or things that you've learned over time that you would give to somebody who's just thinking of starting out now?
The single biggest advice I would give would be to be absolutely obsessive with speaking to customers. And ultimately, all the other bits of advice, all of that can fall by the wayside as long as you're being really, really clear with the group of people that your product is trying to solve. And I think the problem in the social impact space is that the end mission, the end goal is really important, and that's your raison d'etre. But don't get too focused on that solution and that goal. I'd recommend speaking to 100 different customers and continue to speak to customers and continue to speak to customers. It's a very Y Combinator philosophy, right? Which is, build something that people want. But I do think that just having continuous conversations with customers will stand you in a really great position in any business that you try to build.
Yep. Fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today on Tech for Good. If you've got suggestions for guests or topics we should be covering on Tech for Good, do get in touch. And if you're thinking of starting a Tech for Good venture and looking for investment, don't forget to check out bethnalgreenventures.com to see whether we might be able to help. That's it for this week. Thanks again to Chris.
Thanks, Paul.
And thanks for listening, and goodbye.